Chapter 4. Take action to shed excess baggage and discover new capabilities. In a novel, Line of Duty, author Michael Grant has one of his characters deliver this. A guy I fish with once told me a funny story. He just bought an anchor, and as he went forward to tie it to the anchor line, he slipped and fell overboard. Suddenly, he's sitting on the bottom of the lake in 15 feet of water, cradling his brand new anchor. He didn't want to let go, but he was running out of breath. Realizing his choice was drowning or losing the anchor, he reluctantly let go and swam to the surface. The character in the novel, a police detective, went on to say, "The job has been my anchor, and I've been holding on to it for 23 years. I don't want to let go either, but I've run out of breath." Most people can be caught holding onto prized anchors. Another way to look at it is in terms of roles. A person gets so used to a role, so comfortable in that role that, even though unhappy, the fear and trauma of stepping outside the role feels worse than the pain of continuing in it. Such roles include the victim. "Why me? It's so unfair." The martyr. "I give up everything for you." The last angry man. "I'm mad as hell at everybody and everything, but I will keep taking it." The misunderstood genius, and so on. So much of our current thoughts and actions have their basis in childhood. My aversion to having a large house with a yard to care for is a direct result of growing up in an overlarge home where there was always some damn thing in need of repair or cleaning or replacement, some project to be done, or worse, some disaster to be battled. Like in our second house, a basement that flooded every spring to such a degree that neighbors' animals lined up two by two outside, and growing up with yards always in need of mowing or weeding, until I discovered that a hungry Shetland pony on a tether made lawnmowers obsolete. Anyway, I am emotionally averse to all that. Of course, that's obvious. No need for years of therapy to figure that out. And it's not particularly important. But it is only one of who knows how many examples of today's thoughts, attitudes, likes, dislikes, fears, ideas, and behaviors firmly rooted in childhood programming that has never been challenged or even reconsidered. In cases where this does no harm or even helps, I suppose there's no need to tinker with it. But what about the baggage that does burden, the anchor that does drown, the past programming that does limit? It is plain as can be that people are controlled. Yes, controlled throughout their adult lives by limits that were set and by behaviors that were prescribed early on, then never challenged. If you are not achieving the results you tell yourself you want out of life, it may very well be that these set in the past restrictions are getting in your way. In the late 1980s, I had the privilege of editing and assembling a new audio cassette series featuring the recorded radio broadcasts and lectures of Dr. Maxwell Maltz, famous in the 1950s for his best selling book Psycho-Cybernetics, in which he advanced the idea that everything from a person's financial success to the accuracy of his golf swing was controlled by a subconsciously held, very detailed self image, largely constructed out of childhood programming and experiences, then reinforced through self talk. Dr. Maltz was first pointed in this direction while in practice as a cosmetic surgeon. Many patients came believing that getting some physical flaw fixed, a nose bobbed, breasts enlarged, would alter the way they felt about themselves and make them happier. But even after surgery that made them beautiful or handsome on the outside, they still thought, talked, and acted as if nothing had changed. From this observation, Dr. Maltz made the giant leap, now virtually accepted as universal truth, that a person can practice the perfect golf swing, for example, all he wants and still suffer an awesome slice, unless and until he somehow alters the image he has of himself as a golfer. There is a kind of mental magnetism connected to the self image. Earl Nightingale put it this way: we become what we think about most. Of course, that's not instantly, literally true. If it were, as a teenager, I'd have become Playmate of the Month. But over time, it is true. People do think themselves sick, or old before their time, or a victim, a perpetual loser. Certainly, experience alters the self image. For years, a person considers himself hopelessly clumsy. Then, out of dire necessity, he picks up tools and fixes something and is shocked to discover the awkward lack of coordination of teenage years has been replaced by reasonable facility, and he can drive a nail, and now has to question the long held limiting self image. Hey, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not so clumsy after all. There's no reason that has to happen only by happy accident. Instead, you can benefit enormously by testing your limits. Let's see if this is true. The more of this you do, the more likely you are to uncover abilities you didn't know you had. In The Hobbit, Bilbo Baggins said, I don't like adventures. They make one late for dinner. That is the attitude of far too many people. At age 25, David Smith, college dropout, gambler, playboy, occasional salon keeper, began what he called a healing journey of exploration. By the time he was 35, he had become the first person to swim from Africa to Europe, had kayaked 2,000 miles down the Nile, run a marathon with tribesmen in Kenya, and put himself through a number of other incredible adventures. You can read about his book, Healing Journey, The Odyssey of an Uncommon Athlete. David inscribed the book to me, to a man who knows the art of adventure. Frankly, I wish that was a bit truer than it actually is. But I do stretch, I do test, constantly. Why not? Fortunately, I grew up hearing, how do you know until you try? You don't. Take a closer look at the labels sewn on you. Labels get sewn on children. Then they often stay on them as they become adults, even though they are no longer correct, if they ever were. Consider these labels. Such a clumsy and awkward child, slow learner, bookworm, shy wallflower, the quiet type, daydreamer, just not good with math, sports, spelling, etc. Or consider these. Clint Eastwood was told by an executive at Universal Pictures that he had no future as an actor because he had a chipped tooth, an Adam's apple that was too prominent, and talked too slow. Best-selling millionaire author Scott Turow must be a shock to his high school English teacher. Scott got an F in that course. In his first fight, Joe Louis was knocked down 6 times in 3 rounds and labeled by one sports writer as a doormat with no future. Charles Schultz, creator of Peanuts, was turned down for a job as a cartoonist at the Disney Studios and told he lacked talent. What life's winners do about their labels. The artichoke factor. The labels of football teams are interesting. In many cases, there are images invoked for the players to live up to. The Los Angeles Raiders, for example, with a private logo, silver and black colors, Raiders name, all that calls for a very tough, aggressive, physical style of play. Players have talked about there being something special about that tradition. They've said that when you put on a Raiders uniform, something happens to you inside. For years, the Pittsburgh Steelers were famous for their steel curtain defense. For obvious reasons, you'll probably never see a football team named the Williamsburg Librarians. Which brings us to the small Scottsdale Community College in 1975, with a very liberal student body opposed to competitive sports. They considered football frivolous, superficial, and representative of a too violent, too male dominated society. As a symbol of their feelings, they elected the artichoke as the official mascot of the college's football team. Imagine the ridicule you'd suffer suiting up and taking the field as a player on the Scottsdale Artichokes. The Artichokes played their games at a local high school because their own practice field had no bleachers, and no funds were ever approved for any. Their head coach, John Aviantos, had no scholarships to offer in recruiting talented players. Burdened with the Artichoke name, given no recruiting tools, minimal funds, Coach Aviantos still won four conference championships, went to two bowl games, and never had a losing season. Coach Adviantas coined the term the artichoke factor to represent the aspect of a person's character that inspires him to rise to a challenge, to look at the labels that have been sewn on, disagree, and tear them off. Successful people rarely start out labeled as most likely to succeed, Coach told me. In the sixth year of his tenure there, an 8-foot high sculpture of an artichoke was erected, a monument of Aviantos' determination not to let a negative, humiliating label stay soon on his football program and his players. Labels sewn on accidentally in childhood are one thing, labels attached to us as adults are another. The CBS News anchor Dan Rather once commented that one of the most shocking lessons in life is the discovery that not everyone wishes you well. There is a surprising amount of jealousy, envy, and resentment directed at high achievers in every field. The more you try to do, and the more you do, the more you will be subjected to it. Consider the idiot label that the media tried so hard to sew onto Vice President Don Quayle. His words and actions were scrutinized with microscopic intensity for the express purpose of catching something that could be used to get another stitch sewn with that label. Last Sunday, I listened as Vice President Al Gore gave a long, rambling, meaningless, confused answer to a question on Meet the Press and was not challenged then, nor did anyone comment on it later. Had it been Quayle, it would have been front page news. Quayle has defied the label with a mixture of humor, quiet confidence, determination, and strategic action, and has refused to let it limit or interfere with his actions. We may yet see Dan Quayle as a serious contender for the White House. He might surprise a lot of people and make a good president. As I mentioned in this book's introduction, the washed up has-been label was sewn on Joan Rivers after the loss of her talk show and the suicide of her husband, and it was sewn on her by her own agent and manager, many supposed friends, and the media. Joan defied the label with grit, hard work, a willingness to go through any door of opportunity she could find, humor, talent, and self-confidence. She refused to let her actions be limited or dictated by the label others were so eager to attach to her. In preparation for another book, I did considerable research on Debbie Fields, founder of Mrs. Fields Cookies. She and I also appeared as speakers on several events together. Debbie is arguably one of the best known, most widely recognized, and most phenomenally successful women entrepreneurs of our time. But in the beginning, she was labeled as an empty headed housewife by her husband's business acquaintances, bankers, family, quote unquote friends, vendors, and suppliers. Fran Tarkenton, who I've gotten to know thanks to a number of Gothy-Ranker Corporation projects, was labeled too small to play in the NFL. Today's quarterbacks are still scrambling to catch up to some of his records. More recently, Doug Flutie, a collegiate football superstar, was labeled too small to play pro ball by the NFL. Last year, he was the most valuable player with his multi-million-dollar arm in the expanding Canadian Football League. It seems that the world is eager to attach labels. Too old, too young, too small, too big, too slow, too dumb, too clumsy, too inexperienced, too this or that. You've just about got to keep one eye open while you sleep, because somebody may be sneaking up to try and label you. It is important to note that successful people tend to defy their labels, past and present, with their actions. Unsuccessful people accept and conform to their labels by their actions. Chapter 5: Take Action to Get Paid. One of the most interesting metaphysical authors, Stuart Wilde, says, "When they show up, build them." What does that mean? It actually refers as much to overriding attitude as to business policy. One meaning is to properly value your time. If you do not place a high value on your time, I can promise you no one else will. Yet, the one thing we all have an equal amount of is time. Everybody starts out each day with 24 hours to invest as wisely as possible, for profit, for joy, for the benefit of others. The richest man in the world gets not a minute more to work with than does the poorest beggar on the street. But you can bet everything you've got that he thinks about that time differently, feels about that time differently, allocates that time differently, and has an entirely different intellectual, emotional, physical, and actual experience with time than does the beggar. There's the rub. To get from poor to rich, you have to adopt the attitudes about time of the rich. Another meaning, a bigger one, is to value yourself. When I first started in the success education business, one of the few people in the country who was consistently effective at selling self-improvement audio cassette programs direct, face-to-face to executives and salespeople, gave me what turned out to be very, very good advice. He said, "Don't waste your time trying to sell these materials to the people who need it most. They won't buy it. You should focus on selling to successful people who want to get even better." Over the years, I've demonstrated the validity of this to myself a number of different ways, and I've developed an explanation for it. There is what I now call the self-esteem catch-22 loop. At work here, in order for a person to invest directly in himself, which is what buying self-improvement materials is, he has to place value on himself. Example, have high self-esteem. But if he has such high self-esteem, he is probably already doing well and does not have a critical need for this type of information. He will get marginal improvement out of it. But the person who needs it most does not place much value on himself. He has relatively low self-esteem, which inhibits or prohibits him from buying, believing in, or using self-improvement materials. At a very practical level, I see this value hung up surface all the time with entrepreneurs, authors, speakers, consultants, doctors dealing with fees and prices. I understand it. I still remember the first time I quoted a client $15 million to develop a direct mail campaign for him, held my breath, and instantly thought to myself, "Geez, Kennedy, a lot of people work all year to make that much money. What business do you have asking for that for a few days' work? Who do you think you are anyway?" But here's the amazing thing. The world largely accepts your appraisal of your value, and just about everybody undervalues and underprices their contributions. My good friend Rodney Tollison was very active for a handful of years in the practice management business, providing doctors of chiropractic with a comprehensive collection of business building services, training, and counseling. I worked with him doing many of the seminars. We both discovered that these professionals were no different than anyone else. They had incredible mental and emotional blocks about charging what they and their service were worth. Although his company provided them with enormously helpful technical, management, and marketing assistance and tools, the greatest income leaps were achieved by focusing on the doctor's belief about worth and value, practice esteem, and self-esteem. There were more fee resistance in the doctor's minds than in the public's. In all their actions relative to promoting the practice, stimulating referrals, asking for and promptly collecting fees, insisting on compliance with recommendations, were governed, hindered by their surprisingly low self appraisals. A no BS marketing letter. Subscriber and inner circle member hits the nail on the head. I'm fortunate to have tens of thousands of inner circle members and subscribers who are bright, curious, innovative, and contributive. So ours is more of a continuing dialogue than just my publishing a newsletter. One such member is David Garfinkel, the president of a consulting firm named Let Your Clients Do Your Selling. When I got into the final stages of this book, I invited my members to submit their ideas about the ultimate secret of success. David's suggestions was most interesting, and while it does not name the ultimate secret, it does hit the nail on the head about the chief obstacle to benefiting from that secret. David said, after all the smoke clears, it gets down to one thing, one limiting belief, one self concept that, once revamped, will set you off on a permanent success trajectory. I think that's different from each of us, but it's usually a personal version of the feeling, yes, I really can succeed. I agree. For more than 15 years, I have explained that we live inside two boxes. The solid outer boundary represents real limits, and we all have some real limits. The oldest active player in the NFL is Vince Evans, a backup quarterback at the LA Raiders. Vince is 39 years old, my age. Still, I really can't go try out and make the roster of an NFL team. Even if I trained for the next 12 months, I still couldn't do it. Vince has stayed in peak condition and played his entire life. I didn't play in high school. I didn't go to college. I rarely exercised and haven't worked out in years. I have chronic back problems and one bad knee. And well, I'd go out of the tryout on a stretcher. I just cannot play pro football, no matter how much I may desire it, unless I buy a team. Even then, I probably wouldn't get through a series of downs. That is a real limit. As of now, you can't do business on Mars. That's a real limit. But way inside that solid line, real boundary, is the dotted line. The dotted line represents the self-imposed limits. This is a much smaller box we build around ourselves. It's made up of if, can't, impossible, inaccurately applied of negatives in the big four of life: self-esteem, self-image, self-confidence, and self-discipline. But David's suggestion adds a new wrinkle to all these, that there is one dot on this dotted line that is bolder, blacker, bigger, and more significant than all others, and that when you bust through it, the entire dotted line box disappears. In monetary terms, that dotted line certainly controls how much value you place on yourself, your time, your know how, and your services, how much you dare demand, and how much you get. Anytime you push that box out, you automatically increase your income. Now, I would suggest that the biggest leap can come from pushing against it at the point where it seems strongest. Abundance doesn't care. Liberals constantly try to demonize exceptional ambition and achievement. This follows a liberal theme that the economy is and must be win-lose. If one person gets too rich, that must somehow force others to become poor or poorer. This kind of class divisiveness may be necessary politics for the liberals, but it is economic nonsense. And unfortunately, this is one of the ways people build up guilt about striving for and achieving extraordinary successes. Foster Hibbard often talks about two men going down to the ocean, one with a teaspoon, the other with a bucket, each taking away the amount of water he chooses to take away. The ocean, however, doesn't care. The ocean doesn't care if you come down there with a teaspoon, bucket, or tanker truck. The ocean is a miraculously replenishing unlimited resource. That represents abundance, and abundance doesn't care either. It matters not to abundance whether you tap into it a little or a lot. Your withdrawals doesn't diminish anyone else's opportunities, nor do they damage the total amount of available abundance. It is infinite, infinite, and the only limits on your share are placed on you by you. The chapter ends with a saying, "What you are willing to accept is what you get." Chapter 6. Take action to win over worry. I have had a great many misfortunes in my life, but only about half as many as I have painfully anticipated. Worry can create physical illnesses, stress, and fatigue. Worry robs you of your competence and confidence. Many people are literally immobilized by worry. Yet, as destructive as we know worry to be, and as unnecessary as worrying often proves to be, most people still let worry into their lives virtually every day. Ironically, we give our worries power by thinking about them. The more you worry about something, the more power worry itself gains over you. Even small worries can amass enormous power if you let them, Dr. Edward Kramer observed. A penny held to the eye blocks the sun. So, how do you eliminate worry for life? I'm not sure you can eliminate it. Worry is often the starting point of constructive creative thought, but you can reduce its time consumption and influence in your life. If you can temporarily do it with chemicals, booze, prescription over the counter, or street drugs. Personally, I used the drink to the coma method myself for several years. The problem with that is, when you return to the real world, the things you were worrying about are there waiting for you, and you're further handicapped in dealing with them by the hangovers and other physical debilitation. This kind of escape yields no real benefit and has its own added costs. I can't speak to the drug thing as I've never tried any street drugs and very rarely even swallow a Tylenol, but I can talk about alcohol from experience, and I'll only briefly say this. If you find yourself knocking back a few every day, everything you tell yourself about not having a problem is crap. You've got a problem. Not a solution, a problem. If you protect it and continue with it, it will eventually destroy your business or career, an important relationship, your health, or land you in jail. If you cannot quickly kick this habit alone, get help. The only real antidote for worry is action. Decision is the empowering opposite of worry. When you take action to solve a problem, you take power away from the problem and you gain power. For every source of worry and anxiety, there is usually a list of a number of potentially helpful actions. If you'll get involved in making that list and acting on all the items on that list, worry will be eliminated. It cannot coexist with such constructive action. I recently read an article about a CEO of a huge company on the brink of financial ruin. Presented with the fact that they had only enough cash to operate the business for another 3 days, what then, he asked, are we going to spend it on? He was instantly moving on to actions, not worry. If you find yourself too frequently immobilized by worry, I have a book to recommend. W. Clement Stone's The Success System That Never Fails. Pay particularly attention to his discussion of the sudden termination of his right to represent a particular company, the end of a business he had struggled mightily to build, an imminent and apparently unmanageable threat to everything he had and everything he had worked for, and how he reacted to it. But what about the problem you cannot take any action to resolve? First of all, there's rarely any situation that defies all action. But for the sake of conversation, let's assume that you are up against something so tough that, at least at the moment, there is absolutely nothing you can do, no action you can take. If that is the case, then the only thing you can do is set the problem aside entirely and take action on some other matter or project that you can do something about. The only antidote for worry is action. What about worrying about what others think? A great deal of unhappiness comes from people pursuing and achieving others' goals instead of their own. When I was a kid, one of our neighbors, Ralph F., created a great deal of unhappiness for himself, his wife, and his five sons by obsessing over his son's disinterest in taking over the family business. I wonder how many kids buckle under to such pressure and achieve the goals their parents set for them and wind up wishing they hadn't. Working to achieve others' goals set for you, to meet others' expectations, to satisfy others' definitions. That is what you do when you worry about what others think. My friend Herb True had moved from the academic world to a very successful career in professional speaking and could have continued to enjoy a growing exceptional income, create and market cassette albums, author best selling books, and accumulate wealth. He chose not to. Herb chose to cut his business back to taking just a few speaking engagements a year so he could return to teach at Notre Dame. When he did so, I know that many of his peers and friends thought he'd lost his marbles, or gotten too old to compete, or had the business pass him by. None of those things are true, but regardless of what anybody else or everybody else thought, Herb chose to pursue his goals. The result is one of the most contented but invigorated, happy, and fulfilled individuals I know or have ever observed. Oh, and you'd probably be surprised if you knew how little others think about you. Most people have their hands full dealing with their own lives. They ponder yours a lot less than you probably assume. But regardless of how little or great the world's interest is in how you choose to live your life, sooner or later you stand in your own space. The cure for worry over others' opinions is taking action that satisfies you, and as a result increases your sense of control, feeling of power, self confidence, and self esteem. Others can never gift you with self esteem or peace of mind. These are products of your own actions. Chapter 7. Take action when your inner voice speaks. About 40 years ago, an expectant mother took a $500 risk and placed a little ad in 17 magazine for a new purse monogrammed with the customer's initials. She believed in her idea and acted on it, even though $500 was a great deal of money for her at the time, even though she had no market research to support it, even though she had no business experience. Her little ad produced $32,000 in orders, and these days, her Lillian Vernon company sells more than $150 million of merchandise each year. In a speech to the New York Venture Group on May 17, 1990, Lillian Vernon said, "I make quick decisions. I take chances, relying on what I consider my golden gut." She went on to say, growing from $1 million to a multi-million-dollar company involved areas such as finance, list management, computers, and large-scale production, realms beyond my expertise. I tried to cover my shortcomings by surrounding myself with experienced veterans of large corporate cultures, usually from outside the direct marketing industry. There were so few direct marketers in the early 1970s that I filled my ranks with managers from different walks of life who generally were very savvy to the ways of big business, and most of them almost killed us. I don't want to generalize, but some of the corporate executives I hired just couldn't make a decision. They took analysis to the point of paralysis. Every consideration had to first be studied by a committee. In my business, sending a good idea to a committee is like sending Rip Van Winkle to a slumber party. I hate more than anything to wake up and find that one of my competitors is already doing something I was planning on. Lillian Vernon continues to pick winning products for her catalogs today, often trusting her golden gut and making fast decisions. Confident decisiveness is one of the most prized qualities in the business world. All great leaders exhibit it. People naturally respond to such a person, It is easy for the decisive individual to inspire trust and cooperation. Where does this kind of confident decisiveness come from? Call it what you will: intuition, the golden gut, the inner voice, insight. Most exceptionally successful people admit to listening to a secret inner advisor. A few thoughts about insight. The mind can only proceed so far upon what it knows and can prove. There comes a point where the mind takes a leap, call it intuition or what you will, and comes out on a higher plane of knowledge. A quote by Albert Einstein. My friend and speaking colleague Lee Milter wrote an outstanding book, Success is an Inside Job, and I thought excerpts from its chapter on intuition, your secret talent, would be appropriate here. Beginning of quote. It is interesting that in our Western culture, we seem to comprehend almost all of our experience through the logical, linear, analytical thinking process. We use words to communicate this kind of thinking because words are our way of understanding our world. We've almost forgotten we have an intuitive, creative part of ourselves. We're not trained to say, I feel, but rather, I think. If we deny and cut off our intuition, then we get trapped by concepts learned through our programmed minds. Yesterday's learned beliefs alone cannot solve today's challenges or enable us to capitalize on tomorrow's opportunities. Today, more and more successful people, executives, artists, entrepreneurs, are realizing that making decisions is not an exclusive function of the analytical left side of the brain. You must know, or you must now use, the intuitive and creative right side of your brain as well. You must have an integration of analytical and intuitive thinking. This is commonly referred to as whole brain thinking, Dr. Jonas Salk said. A new way of thinking is now needed to deal with our present reality. Our subjective responses are more sensitive and more rapid than our objective responses. This is the nature of the way the mind works. We first sense, then we reason why. I suggest that you have some fun in your life and start testing your intuitive abilities. When the phone rings, ask yourself who it is before you answer. See how many times you're right. When waiting for an elevator, guess which one will come first. There are dozens of small games you can play with yourself to strengthen your abilities. Your intuitive muscle gets stronger as you use it. Then, when you need your intuition, you will feel more confident in using it. In his book, The Intuitive Edge, Philip Goldberg noted astonishing speed with which the truly intuitive mind can bring together bits of information only remotely related in time and meaning to form the sudden hunch or whispered feeling that we call intuition. Conrad Hilton, who was well known for using his intuition in his hotel business, wrote, I know when I have a problem and have done all I can to figure it out. I keep listening in a sort of inside silence till something clicks and I feel a right answer. End of quote. Here are some of Lee's action tips for encouraging your intuition. 1. Listen to your body. That's why we call intuition a gut feeling. The solar plexus is a large network of nerves located behind the stomach and is said to be the seat of emotion. You can have an accurate gut level reaction to many situations. 2. Allow yourself to redefine the problem frequently. Writing out the problem gives you the opportunity to see the problem from a different perspective. 3. Allow yourself to play. You don't have to be sitting in your office to come up with creative and intuitive solutions. Take a walk, feed the birds, play hooky for an hour, and then come back to work on the problem. 4th, take action on your insights. Start investigating with the approach of, will this hunch logically work? Two of the self-help pioneers that I've long been a serious student of, Napoleon Hill and Dr. Edward Kramer, both promote reliance on insight and intuition. I don't often talk about it, but I often act on little flashes that come to me seemingly out of the blue. I'll give you an example. Earlier this year, at the second Jeff Paul's Tells All mail order seminar we sponsored, one of the attendees was a longtime subscriber and student of mine, Dr. Michael Anderson, owner of a very successful chiropractic practice management company. During the 2 days of the seminar, I heard about his goals and objectives. On my flight home, a flash came. I'll bet Dr. Anderson would buy my success track business, notably including my practice building secrets newsletter for chiropractors. Prior to that flash, I had not even thought out spinning that business off, although I was gradually recognizing that it was no longer a good fit with my other interests and activities and was therefore being neglected. As I thought about this flash, I developed an argument in my mind for synergy between Dr. Anderson's current business and goals and what I had to offer that made mine worth more to him than it was to me. More importantly, immediately on my arrival at home, I generated a letter to Dr. Anderson suggesting the deal, and the win-win deal was consumed in a matter of weeks. For me, this is not at all unusual. These flashes frequently occur. I frequently act on them quickly and I frequently benefit as a result. Consequently, I'm a believer in the role of intuition in otherwise hard-nosed, tough-minded, pragmatic business environments. And I find information on the subject, such as that Lee has assembled in her new book, of great value. How to use the miraculous dominant thought principle to energize your inner advisor. I will try to tell this true life story as briefly as possible. In my hometown of Akron, Ohio, a prominent judge, respected citizen, family man, wound up on the front page of the Akron Beacon Journal and in prison as a child molester. This was 20 years ago. We were still shocked by such things. He was asked how a man like him could wind up in such a horrible situation. He described a process, he said. One day years ago, I was out watering my lawn. A little girl in a sundress went by, and for a fleeting millisecond I thought about what it would be like with her. Then, of course, I pushed it from my mind. But a year or so later, at a mall, another girl, and I held the thought for maybe a minute. He went on to mention another incident, a few minutes of thought. Another incident, 15 or 20 minutes of thought. Then one day he said, I woke up and found it was all I was thinking about. For days, it dominated my thoughts. Then I did it. This is a negative example of the amazing power of dominant thought. After 20 years of intense research into what made super successful people tick, Napoleon Hill wrote, Our brains become magnetized with the dominating thoughts which we hold in our minds, and by means which no man is familiar, these magnets attract to us the forces, the people, the circumstances of life, which harmonize with the nature of our dominating thoughts. I know this to be true, personally, in its positive and its negative application. When you come to grips with this dominant thought principle, you have the supercharged device for dramatically accelerating the achievement of any objective. Instead of taking weeks, months, or years to move from first fleeting thought to dominant thought, deliberately utilizing dominant thought, because the lapse of time between dominant thought, action, and achievement is minimal. All time is taken up in getting to dominant thought. Very little time is required to get from dominant thought to reality. Beyond this, dominant thoughts energize your inner advisor. Your dominant thoughts are your inner advisor's directives. Your dominant thoughts tell your inner advisor what to work on. Your inner advisor then jumps into action, mobilizes all the vast resources of your subconscious mind, your memory, your experience, your connection to universal intelligence. Then your inner advisor tells you precisely what to do, who to call, where to go, and when to act, to get from dominant thought to reality as rapidly as possible. When you energize your inner advisor with deliberate dominant thought, you can trust and confidently decisively act on the advisor's recommendations. Chapter 8: Take action to profit from the power of positive association. Advertising agency empire builder David Ogilvy established a tradition of welcoming new executives with a gift of 5 wooden dolls, each smaller than the other, one inside the other. When the recipient finally gets to the fifth little doll, the smallest doll, and opens it, he finds this message: if each of us hires people who are smaller than we are, we shall become a company of dwarfs. But if each of us hires people who are bigger than we are, we shall be a company of giants. You can certainly take this beyond hiring. If you surround yourself and spend time with people who are smaller than you are, you will stay as you are. Take action to involve smart people in your projects. I am constantly impressed with how my clients, Greg Renker and Bill Guthey of the Guthey-Renker Corporation, pull together project teams, invite outside experts and consultants to their company meeting, collect qualified opinions and data, and patiently explore differing viewpoints. They constantly apply Napoleon Hill's mastermind principle: take a millionaire to lunch. There are smart people readily accessible everywhere. You might seek out and tap retired and highly experienced executives or entrepreneurs in your field to assist and advise you. You might find successful people in your field, in other geographic areas, happy to share their experiences for the price of a lunch or dinner. My speaking colleague Jim Rohn urges people: take a millionaire to lunch. Jim says to buy him a big juicy steak, fine wine and dessert, and keep asking him questions, and keep listening carefully. And he observes that most people are too short-sighted to ever take this advice. Hey, the guy's a millionaire. Let him buy his own steak. I'd add that most people take people to lunch who know less than they do, have less successful experience than they do, like a tennis player preferring the company of inferior players. You might find smart, helpful people through professional associations or at seminars and conferences. You might need to hire smart people to advise you or provide very specialized services for your business. Only one thing is certain: you won't find smart people if you do not take action to find them. Recently, at the American Booksellers Association, or ABA, I ran into a young couple who had authored and published an excellent, unusual travel book. I had met them about 7 months earlier at a conference for self-publishers where I spoke. At that conference, they had asked me a few questions, but been resistant to advice they didn't like, clearly eager for someone to validate their own opinions, and even more clearly, unwilling to pay for expert assistance. At ABA, they told me of having just appeared on a major national network daytime talk show. But their book wasn't in stores, and they never got their own 800 number given out on the show. Were not prepared to negotiate with the show's producers, and were not prepared to hold their own as one of several guests on a panel. Another of the guests monopolized the entire show. I certainly could have made sure they got their 800 numbers shown and given out on the show. The calls handled probably sold 5,000 or more books immediately by phone and collected 3 times that many inquiries, coached them in asserting themselves on the show, and otherwise helped them capitalize on this very difficult to get exposure. And I'm not the only one. There are any number of people very well qualified as advisors in such a situation, but they squandered a once in a lifetime opportunity by being stubborn and by being cheap. Every business, every occupation, and every field has grown far too complex for one person to go it alone and capably handle every aspect of the activity. Insisting on doing everything yourself is very false economy. In his first book, Lee Iacocca wrote about his team of horses, the mastermind group that turned Chrysler into a winner. In many instances, the existence and importance of a mastermind group within a business organization goes unnoticed by most of the outside world. But behind most successes, there is between a 2-person and a 20-person mastermind alliance hard at work. Now, here's a tricky part. You cannot listen only to advice you like and only to opinions that validate your own. Well, you can, but you'll almost certainly fail in most of your endeavors. Sometimes the most valuable person is the one with the courage to confront you and tell you the emperor has no clothes. On the other hand, you need to take great care in choosing those people you test ideas on and solicit opinions from. At my seminars, I all too often hear from the person who had a great idea, bounced it off a few friends, got talked out of it, only to subsequently see someone else come up with the same idea and go on to amass a fortune. It's a frequently told tale. In describing the proper makeup of a mastermind group, the short list of those people you choose to routinely serve as your sounding boards, Dr. Napoleon Hill wrote, "We share nothing we plan to achieve with anyone except those who believe in us and who are in complete sympathy with our plans." This does not mean yesers. No, we need good criticism. We need someone to point out the flaws and hazards we may overlook in our enthusiasm. But these people have to be truly eager for our success, confident of our abilities, progressive, innovative, and optimistic in general, and possessing of successful, relevant experience and knowledge. Walt Disney was more brutal and brief in his comments about others' opinions. He would typically ask 10 people for their opinions, and when all 10 disliked one of his ideas, he would rate the one as most worthy of investment. The great actor, Peter Ustinov, said, "If the world should blow itself up tomorrow, the last audible voice would be that of an expert saying, 'It can't be done.'" Beware the expert who can only tell you what you cannot do or cannot do without the expert. Look instead for the knowledgeable person who may point out flaws and question premises that can and will also suggest possibilities and improvements, and in general is eager to figure out how you can accomplish your stated objectives. Such people have to be big enough not to be jealous or envious of your success and accomplishments. They have to be smart enough to know what they do not know and secure enough to admit it. A person with equally strong opinions about everything cannot be trusted. They must not fear the truth or shun reality, but they must be overall optimistic and positive minded by nature. To paraphrase the title of Peter McWilliams' book, you cannot afford the luxury of a truly negative individual as a close advisor. And your collection of advisors should include people from inside your particular field and from other diverse fields. Finally, in soliciting and considering opinions, there is a time to say, "Enough has to be enough," and then take action. I have often taken pains to correct people's picture of the entrepreneur as a wild eyed risk taker, defining the entrepreneur instead as someone who manages risk. Obviously, the more information and worthwhile opinion you can assemble and consider before making an important decision, the better. However, this balances out a value of passing time issue. The assembly and evaluation of information can become a never ending pursuit in and of itself, with always one more person yet to be heard from, one more source yet to consult, and one more piece of data to be obtained. If you're constantly seduced by the next piece of information to be uncovered, paralysis of analysis takes over. The three-legged stool of successful achievement. Picture in your mind a three-legged stool. If one leg is missing, you can't sit on it. You topple over. One leg is no more important than the other. All three legs share exactly equal importance. Two without three is no better than one without two or even none. All three are virtually necessary. Their importance is evenly, perfectly balanced. So, one of these legs is information. Another, advice and association. The third is decision and action. Watch the pro football coach on the sidelines the next time a game is on television. He has less than a minute between plays to direct his offense. He has information in his hands, usually on pages attached to a clipboard. Is a game plan, including a collection of planned plays, all built on prior careful analysis of information collected about the opposing team's strengths, weaknesses, and behavior, as well as his own players' abilities, strengths, and weaknesses. He has advice and association. During the week before the game, most coaches confer with all their assistant coaches and players, and often by phone with a few trusted, little mentioned advisors, like other coaches, retired coaches. During the game, he is getting input from assistant coaches in the skybox above the field and from other assistants on the sidelines with him. He is getting instant feedback from the players. Here's what happened. Here's what I noticed on the last play. But then he still has less than a minute to arrive at a decision. And it doesn't matter whether it is what might be judged as a minimally important situation, the play of the game, or a life or death situation. Fourth and 4, 2 minutes left, down by a touchdown. He still has less than a minute. How would you do under similar pressure? Of these three legs, advice and association is the one you can and need to set up in advance, cultivate over time, and use on a daily basis. You'll do yourself a great favor by organizing your own network, your own brain trust, or people whose judgment and support you can depend on. You'll do yourself another favor by joining formal mastermind groups and coaching programs run by reputable experts. The individuals who provided this book to you may very well offer such programs.